Going over IRS Form 8879-F. This is the IRS e-file signature authorization for IRS Form 1041, which is the tax return for estates and trusts. So most individual taxpayers are familiar with IRS Form 8879. That's the e-file signature authorization for a U.S. individual tax return. So the format is fairly similar, but this is the form that you should use in your tax return preparer, your also known as your electronic return originator, ERO for the IRS. The tax preparation firm that you use should be asking you to use this form for e-file signature authorization. Now, if you're a fiduciary, you don't need to use this form. However, a fiduciary that does not use Form 8879F must use IRS Form 8453-FE, which is the U.S. estate or trust declaration for an IRS e-file return. So we'll put a link in the show notes to the article that we created on that, as well as some other forms that we think might be pertinent to a fiduciary that's kind of learning their tax responsibilities. So before we get into this form, I'll just outline some of the responsibilities that each party has. So the tax return preparer has certain responsibilities, and the fiduciary has certain responsibilities. So we'll just refer to the tax return preparer as the ERO, because that's what the form instructions use. So the ERO is responsible for completing the information at the top of this form. They will import the tax numbers into Part 1 of the Form 8879F. This should be from the estate or trust tax return. They'll enter in Part 2 their name and if that's the authorization that they're granted. They will also give this to the fiduciary for review, as well as the tax return, and then at the bottom they will sign and date this form. Now, this form does not actually go to the IRS automatically. It's retained in your tax preparer's records in case of an audit. So they're required to retain this on file for up to 3 years after either the tax return is filed or after it's accepted, whichever is later. So fiduciaries have certain responsibilities under this form too. So just because they're allowing the tax return preparer to generate the PIN and sign the tax return and electronically submit it, they still need to review the tax return. This is part of your fiduciary responsibility to either the estate or the trust. You also check the appropriate box in Part 2, depending on which authorization you plan to grant. You'll indicate your PIN if required. You'll sign and date Part 2, and then you'll give this back to the ERO. So we'll go into a little bit more discussion, but each Form 8879F is good for exactly one tax return. So you should expect to see this year in and year out. You can't use this as a blanket authorization for multiple tax returns. So there are 3 parts to this form. There's Part 1, which contains the tax return information. Part 2 contains the declaration and the signature authorization of the fiduciary. And then Part 3 is the certification authentication by the ERO. So this part is pretty straightforward. At the very top, we've kind of completed this form. So if you're a calendar year filer, you don't need to enter the dates here as a fiscal year. As you note, I entered the exact fiscal year dates of a calendar year, which would not be correct. But imagine that you have a fiscal year that ends on September 31st. So this could be something where this would be October 1st, and then it would end September. Oh, sorry, did I say September 31st? I meant September 30th. I should know that there are only 30 days in September. So that's what the fiscal year would look like if you entered it, or if your tax preparer entered it instead of a calendar year. So for background, a fiscal year is any tax year that ends in a month other than December. So it has to contain 12 months, and the IRS does not consider a fiscal year that does not end at the end of a month. So the end of any month except for December is generally accepted as a fiscal year. So at the very top above part 1, we'll enter the name of the estate or trust. So in this case, we put John Doe's Trust, the EIN for the trust, and then the name and title of the fiduciary. In part 1, we enter certain tax return information. All of these numbers are completely made up for illustrative purposes, so don't ask me where I got them. That they literally are just here to kind of represent what this might look like. So if your trust had a total income of $100,000, this would be pulled from line 9 of the Form 1041. If it distributed all of the income as, required by the terms of the trust, or, in, a lot of trusts are titled to, that the fiduciary has discretion to distribute certain amounts of income to, minimize taxes and things of that nature. So that deduction comes from line 18. Then the taxable income, assuming there weren't any other adjustments, such as a QBI deduction or any other deductions or exemptions, would come from line 23. Then the total tax calculation on that amount. And finally, in line 5, if there was any tax due or overpayment. So that would either, a balance due would be on line 28 of the Form 1041, and then the overpayment would be from line 29. So whichever one is applicable, generally speaking, only one of those two lines should contain a value. So this is all pulled in, and if your ERO is doing this, the tax preparation software does this automatically. So in part 2, you basically are saying under penalty of perjury that you have reviewed the tax return. You're giving certain authorization to your tax return preparer to include correspondence on your behalf with the IRS, just to make sure that they've accepted your return, but nothing further than that. So whether they've accepted the return at the IRS, whether they've rejected it, or if there's a delay, all of that is, part of the electronic permission. You're authorizing within the return that if you owe taxes, or if the estate or trust owes taxes, that the U.S. Treasury has permission to pull that money out of the account that you've provided. If for some reason you need to revoke a payment that has been pre-authorized, you basically have 2 business days prior to the payment date. Otherwise, that money is pretty much gone. So this is just outlining certain things. You've selected a PIN, a personal identification number, as your signature. So you're either going to authorize the tax return preparer. In this case, this would be the ERO's firm. So, this might be H&R Block or whatever, your local accounting firm, not necessarily the CPA or the tax preparer that's doing it. And then you enter your PIN here, and that's going to match the PIN that they enter when they electronically file your return. Or you can enter your own PIN as the fiduciary. It does not matter to either the tax return preparer or the IRS. You simply may want to authorize the PIN signature, because that will allow this to be a little bit more streamlined. Many people are busy. Instead of having to actually go to the office and sign a tax return, this allows the accountability to still be there. And then you're going to sign this form. That's going to be retained in the records for up to 3 years. And then in part 3 below, your ERO is going to simply certify by entering their 6-digit, what's known as an EFIN. So this is their electronic filing ID number, which is assigned to them. So it's a 6-digit number, and then they attach a 5-digit PIN behind it. So in both cases, these PINs, the EFIN PIN or the regular PIN, the IRS strictly does not allow someone to put in all zeros. I mean, that's the easiest password in the world to crack, followed by 1111. But for the purpose of this form, do not put in all zeros. You have to actually put in some sort of number. And then your ERO will sign it, date it, and then keep it on file. So I think we've covered basically what you can expect if you see this form as a fiduciary. We do cover a little bit more detail in our article, plus there are links in our show notes to other forms that you may want to be familiar with, just in case. If you have any questions, you can always refer to our article. Simply go to teachmepersonalfinance.com, type in IRS Form 8879-F, and you'll see this article appear. We'll also put links in the show notes to other relevant videos and articles that we've created around this topic. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please hit me up in the comments section. And if there's something that you would like to see in an upcoming video, please hit me up. Thank you very much and have a great day.